there's very few taboos in modern society, and yet there's one subject, one area of life, you could say, that still is rarely spoken about openly, without filter. And yet it's one of, if not the most common, shared human experience, and that is death. Death of the human being. Everyone you know is going to die. We are going to die. And yet for some reason, especially in the West, we shy away from speaking about it. And oftentimes when we fall ill, for some reason, we feel like death is a shock. We're not expecting it. Yet we really deeply know that it's a guaranteed aspect of life. What's also interesting is when, I communicate quite a bit about awakening. On the path of awakening, very few people are speaking about death in relation to the awakening path, as in like the actual death of the being. And yet that's a deeply true part of what this life is. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a conversation with you that I had with a wonderful human being called Allison Sattinger. So Allison's an artist, a wonderful artist who works in a variety of mediums, kind of metallurgy, jewellery, paint, fabrics and others. And her artwork caught my eye online, so I started to follow her on Instagram. But what I started to notice about half a year ago was she was sharing online these heartfelt expressions of grief following the passing of a loved one. And the way in which she expressed and the way in which she shared was just so courageous. She was turning towards that thing that we never really speak about. And she was doing so with an open heart and an awakening heart as well. So she's going through, or has been engaged in a path of awakening for many years. So it felt like a real gift to feel Alison's semi-regular expressions about what this grieving process is and what is changing and going on for her. So anyway, these expressions really moved me. So I reached out to her and asked if she'd be willing to, explore this in conversation with me, because exploring death, opening to the truth of death is I think a big part of a spiritual life, a big part of the awakening path, and it's been a big part of my life. I'm so grateful that she said yes, and you get a chance to listen to the conversation now with us. It's audio only, so there's no need to concentrate on our faces. You get to just sit back, put your feet up, relax, and allow us to explore awakening to life through the truth of death. Alison, thank you for this. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I'm so happy to be with you.
I reached out to you a few weeks back following um, finding your Instagram channel, loving your art. You're an artist, aren't you?
I am.
Great. And you work with kind of fabrics and leather and paint. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Paint, leather, stone cutting, silversmithing, tiny bit of goldsmithing, but I'm
Amazing.
scared of it. But yeah, I love art so much.
What would be the difference? Is gold just a lot softer? Is that why it's
Yeah,
different?
it's softer and it's wildly expensive. And so if you make a mistake in silver, you're like, that's all right. But if you make a
Okay.
mistake in gold, you're like, that was,
Yeah, yeah.
a
And
lot.
well, from what I've seen of your artwork, it's so beautiful. Like especially you've been in, I guess, like a little project of yours, like practicing portraits, doing daily portraits recently, haven't you? And they're the smallest, like the tiniest little things, but you're able to capture. I was thinking about this earlier today. You're able to capture that thing that you can't describe. Like, uh, and so there's not really much more I can say about it. But I guess you could call it the humanity or the light
Mm,
in people. And I noticed there was one of a dog with its ear
mm.
whoop, or wonky?
Arrow at the beach. Yeah.
Oh, really? I was just thinking, Alison, how have you managed to do that? Like, because it's just in such a small frame with very little, material, very little paint. It comes to life. It just feels so wonderful. Yeah.
Thank-
Um, so yeah, your art kind of interested me at first, and then yeah, out of the blue, I started reading these ridiculously insightful expressions
mm,
on the human condition, really, I
Yeah.
guess is what I would call it. And yeah, it was just like, I think with each post that I read, and we can talk about like the journey of that, but with each post that I read, I was just kind of more and more drawn into just the humanity and the open-heartedness and the courageousness with which you, well, first of all, communicated, and what you were turning towards. You were turning towards a lot of times quite difficult, real things with an open heart and a courageous spirit. And I was just like, oh yeah. And and believe it or not, I was in a tent one day, and I was kind of out of the blue, just like, oh, I need to message Alison. It's like, oh, that's quite weird. I don't know where that came from. We're just in a tent, like camping, and just all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, it'd be great to have a conversation. Um,
That's
so
so
yeah, that's
cool.
kind of how I came across what you do. So thanks for what you do and what you've been sharing in the world.
Thanks for acknowledging it. It's wow. You never really expect certain things. And this has been a journey of zero expectation. And
Mm,
just when the impetus comes to have something be expressed, it's so powerful. It's so undeniable. And it
yeah.
also feels like I am in the depths of this place, right? And
Mm,
here, take this pearl, like take this thing. So maybe you don't have to have this kind of um, agony. I would describe it at certain points, like a fully accepted agony, right? So
mm.
that I can hand you this thing and maybe you can have that without losing your mom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you pointed to like, yeah, losing your mum. So maybe you want to like expand a little bit on that, because actually, well, it provides a bit of context, doesn't it, to not everything that you've been sharing, but a lot of the heartfelt communications, the words that you've been sharing have been around this event in your life, haven't they?
Yeah. Yeah. My mom died very suddenly. And I want to say unexpectedly, but she was about to be 80. So it's, or 81. So it's not as
Right.
though it was like
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
57. So,
Mhm,
um, yeah, she died very suddenly on February 1st. And
mm,
uh, we were planning a move already. So
mm,
in 3 weeks from her death, we were to be there to house hunt together. She loved looking at real estate.
okay.
She loved looking at houses.
Yeah, yeah. A little bit of context. I know that you've been on a bit of an awakening journey yourself, and I know you listen to maybe some of the similar teachers that I do, because we both attended an online retreat with Angelo DeLulo, didn't we, recently? So
Yeah.
because I saw your face on the screen,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, that how those paths kind of relate to each other, how the awakening or the awakening from delusion then can be, well, yeah, like maybe I wouldn't even say accelerated. It's um, almost like a gauntlet of life, isn't it? That life puts the gauntlet down. It's like, okay, you want to wake up. This is the truth. Like so. We can hypothesize truths in our mind. Is like, what's the true nature of reality? But then reality just doesn't care about that. It just goes, there you go, there's life, and you go, and losing a loved one, death, just whatever that means, because it's actually a bit of a nonsense word anyway, isn't it? Like death, it doesn't tell you anything, but death in itself, it's just like this. Yeah, it's a calling for me. It's been in my life. It's been a calling to face up to truth, and a truth that's so more visceral and undeniable and non-negotiable than any truth that the mind can come up with, because when I've been exploring the nature of truth, the mind likes to play with it a little bit, doesn't it, and think
Mhm.
that it's got it.
Oh,
Whereas
yes.
when you get it, when you come into contact with the true nature of conditions, that what arises passes away, and you feel that passing, and it's combined with, your loved ones. It's just, well, it can go in multiple different ways, but there is an invitation in that to awaken to the truth of that. And this is, what I was feeling. I think you call it like notes from grief or notes from mourning. So it's like a series of different expressions, that kind of tracked your mourning process, grieving process. It's so interesting because when I say that, it sounds like a downward trajectory, doesn't it? Like the grieving process, the mourning process, as in like in modern language. But what blew me away was in the death, all I felt from you was life. Like it was so alive. Like it was just like this heart waking up with life to the truth of death. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, it was really, unfiltered.
Yeah. It feels like this generosity in this strange way, like have this thing, right? Be handed this thing. And then it within that thing is like a fractal pattern of mother and all the life that you've apparently lived with this person
Yeah,
that you've loved so deeply. And
yeah,
then what
yeah.
that invites for you to really fully be with inside of your experience is, and
Mm.
I know that words fail, right? Words can't,
Mm.
they're so pale
It's all we've
compared to
got. It's all we've got, though, isn't it?
it's
So
always
we might as
exactly
we might as well use some.
exactly. But yeah, I had had about a month and a half before she passed, I had had
Mm.
a what I guess would be termed a Kundalini style experience
Oh yeah,
of
like
this
energetic.
extreme,
Yeah.
yes, like this extreme energetic
Mm.
cleansing feeling kind of blew my heart open a little bit. And I remember
Yeah.
telling her about it. And one of the last conversations we had was 3 hours. So my mom
Amazing.
was my person. We would talk about
Yeah, yeah,
nothing,
yeah.
everything. And in that 3 hour conversation, we talked about consciousness. I told her all about the experience. She was so
Yeah.
curious. 2 days before her death, she sent me an article about scientists. There was a theory about these protein microtubules in the brain being almost
I
like a
know it. Yeah.
flute,
Rupert
right? That
Sheldrake.
comes
That's Rupert
together.
Sheldrake, isn't it?
Not sure.
Or it's like an astrophysicist or like an award-winning Nobel Prize winner. It's basically saying that there is quantum consciousness in microtubules. It's nerdy stuff, so we'll not get into it. But yeah, so your mum was kind of like fascinated by this, and
Yeah, so she sent me this
yeah.
article, and then I sent her a video of a woman named Lisa Cahaley who had a
Mm,
profound non-dual experience and left, I think, 11 videos on YouTube. And then she died in her sleep of a heart attack,
right.
which I think is how my mother died. But I sent her this video that same day of, you should see this too. And I don't know if she ever
Yeah.
watched it, but yeah, I mean, the we went very, very deep, especially towards the end. There was
Wow.
nothing
Yeah.
unsaid. There was no
Yeah.
regrets, right?
Awesome. That's so good. Yeah, what that is a gift, isn't it? And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that because of this awakening experience, we'll just call it that, whatever it was, but like the dropping of the self-centered view, like this very separate personality-based view through this awakening, just allowed you to be with your mother in a way that wasn't actually available before. Like from as the Allison, as the daughter, that type of connection just wasn't. Well, I mean, like I said, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like that actually you probably wouldn't have been able to connect in that open, available way maybe 2 years ago or 3 years
Yeah,
ago.
that's pretty accurate. 2 years ago was around the time we had like our last big fight, and something shifted very
Right.
deeply in me about
Mm.
compassion, about being with somebody exactly as they are without
Yeah.
wishing things to be different. And that
Yeah.
was like a huge sea change for me of just be with her as she is unconditionally. And the last 2 years of our experience together was wide open heart space.
Awesome. That's so good. Yeah, what a blessing. What a
Yeah.
blessing. Yeah, and it's interesting because I can reflect on my own experience. So my mum passed away probably about 8 years ago, and she was pretty young. She was like 60. She'd been
Mm,
ill for a long time, so it wasn't a sudden passing. She was in, no, she suffered. There was no doubt about it. She was cognitively really on point all the way until the day of her death, you know. So she was there, and that was a gift. But where I was not what you're describing, you know. So
mm,
actually, I didn't have that chance to drop all of the defenses, you know, that were going on in me to just show up for her. Essentially, that wasn't available to me. So I was just very much kind of like, yeah, trying to manage it as a son with quite a lot of issues, quite a lot of parental issues as well, like in the relationship. So, and it's so interesting going through this awakening process at various degrees, feeling into that now and thinking, oh, it's not regret. I wouldn't call it regret, but yeah, it would have been a very different both experience and relationship while she was ill. You know, I could have been there for her actually. I could have been so much more available for her suffering. Um, but it just wasn't possible at the time. So it's an interesting thing to just feel into, just
I feel
reflect.
tender in that for you. Like I feel that tender spot.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was hard, you know, like, because it's so interesting. So I've met quite a number of people that have been through the mourning process, or the passing of loved ones, whilst they've got this emotional availability. So, and maybe a bit of context. What I mean by that is that, you know, through this awakening process, however it plays out, whether it's Kundalini or whether it's some kind of like dharmic awakening or non-dual realization, whatever it is, but what pretty much always happens is this fixed sense of closed separateness and a point of view through which everything has to be mitigated. You know, it's all just got to go through this tiny, tiny little me. Well, that kind of falls apart. So then the bandwidth opens and there's so much more availability. And I've spoke to a number of people that have been able to be with their loved ones when they've passed. Uh, yeah, when they've awoken to some degree, you know, that centralized me is not so strong. And what's fascinating is that actually the heart knows what to do. If when we're not in the way, the heart knows exactly what to do in those situations. And they've spoken about how, in a lot of ways, it was the least complicated time of their life. No,
Mm,
it's almost like, and for some of them, the most present they've ever felt. They didn't need anything. They were just living in service for their loved one, and yeah, felt deeply connected to presence, life, the universe, whatever you want to call it, but you know, the deep embodied presence. And I just think that's it's just fascinating, isn't it, that actually, yeah, we have this embodied wisdom, let's say, of how to be with each other through life and death.
yes.
And we forgot. You know, we forgot because well, there's so many reasons. I'm not going to go into the because, but it's clear that we've forgotten. But when we remember, it can be an effortless. That doesn't mean easy, but or not sad and not full of sorrow, but it can be an effortless process. We can just trust life to show up to meet death with love.
Yes. It's subtractive, isn't it? It's like a removal of something. It's like a removal of a film in what you've been looking at, and it's clear all of a sudden.
Mm,
Oh, wow, there's
mm,
so much more here because I don't know where you are in terms of shadow work. I'm assuming that you're very that you've done a lot of it. But I feel like as those repressed things come up and are given freedom to be, which means that they don't have to bang around the cage anymore,
yeah,
then that ensuing sense of expansiveness is what allows you to be with that person exactly as they are. And like I feel as though a lot of what we experience when we can't be with someone is like we're chock full, and
Mm,
if there's no space, then somebody else's suffering looks like something to be afraid of or looks like something to escape from, right? Like, whoa, that's
mm,
too much for me because I'm
yeah,
full, it's
yeah.
all full here. And then you empty and you're like, I can be with you angry. I can be with you sad.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm not maybe not going to go too kind of like awakening-y or non-dually or
Yeah,
whatever, but actually that feeling, that full up feeling, although it feels that way, there's nothing there.
right.
And that's the interesting thing is it's just an error. You could say an error of perception, and that error of perception is that I can only deal with so much
Right.
because I deal with things, and there's so many things. There's an infinite number of things, and I can't hold everything. I literally cannot hold everything. So then but we try to, don't we? We try to like grab and hold the good things whilst trying to wrestle with the bad things, and but all of that, it's just thought, really. It's just a movement of the mind trying to make sense of, well, make sense of more thought, really, but make sense of the world through a delusive perspective, really. So when we're able to just let go of the need to be someone managing things, then life just manages itself. Like we become, well, we don't actually become anything. We're already that, but we're able to step into our birthright and realize what we truly are is just like, and that's where it gets difficult. It's like realize what we are, which I cannot explain.
Right.
Yes,
And
it's like realize what we are, which is a force of nature, you could say, but actually, force of nature, those 3 or 4 words, it sounds so trivial, does it? But what you're pointing to there is universal energy. Like if we are a
life.
force of nature, that is everything. We're
Yeah.
part of everything. But being able to trust that is really quite hard because in the moments where we lose loved ones, actually, as an example, death's a great example, illness and health related issues are other ones. It's very difficult to trust that I don't have to do anything as such. You obviously look after your health issues, but I don't have to fix it. It is naturally this way.
Yeah. It is naturally this way. And these are the things that
Mm.
naturally happen. And so being with the actuality of the unfolding is so different than being with our version of what we want it to be, right? The idea that the separate I has, that it's like there's a better way. There's a way that's just 2 inches to the left and it's so much
Yeah.
better. Let's work really hard to get over to that place. It's so
Mm.
endearing, actually. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of compassion for it because it's
Yeah.
so tender. It's just all born of wanting to be safe and comfortable.
It is. It's in that basic need for us to feel safety. Yeah. But that's always here. I mean, it can't be anywhere else, can it? Where else is there?
No. But
We're not gonna
that
find.
like
Yeah.
that erroneous perception
Yeah.
of separation is like I'm in
Yeah.
danger, right?
That's
It's
it.
so
Yeah.
like so tender in there.
Mm. And it's lovely this. Thank you for sharing so openly. And again, I guess a bit more context because from here, this point of view, where we are now, it can sound like, from the passing of your mother, that you just opened to it with a glowing open heart and it just kind of blossomed into compassion. And it was just like, but I know from
Yeah.
reading your kind of journaled experiences, just like, oh God, this was like fucking hard. Like that's the only way to describe it. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, you totally had the capacity, you found out. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing that I thought was so beautiful is that when I was reading this unfolding experience, I was watching an awakening. Basically, this is exactly what was happening. Is that the heart was awakening through this indelible truth, you know,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, it was kind of tough, like it.
At first, I really honestly thought that my body was going to die of shock.
Mm,
I had Like I took a walk
Mm,
I think it was the second day after she died, and that feeling when somebody dies unexpectedly, or I mean, I don't think that there's a bridge between experiences, right? So I'm sure
yeah,
everybody has their own unique
yeah,
experience of somebody's death, but that sudden, she's here, she's fine, she's gone, I'm motherless. You know, the way that that all went down, the intensity. I was driving in a car and I went to the grocery store because I had forgotten 2 bags of almonds, and I still was going to go and get those bags of almonds, right? Like
mm,
the absolute shell shocked nature of that experience of just being like in this world that suddenly was so bright and so searing, right? Everything was like
mm,
so searing. So I went for a walk on day 2 and my heart hurt. My physical heart
yeah,
hurt. And I'm walking home
yeah,
realizing that I'm taking like 3 steps and resting. My body was not
mm,
ready to walk. My body was not ready to like not be cocooned. The
mm,
initial experience of her loss was just a sharp ripping away of all
ah,
kinds of different concepts and ideas.
yeah. Kind of what a horrendous blessing.
Yeah.
Like it's just
Yes.
this. It's like Adi Shanti talks about this fierce grace that we experience on the path, And I think often when we hear that, we focus on the grace,
Mm,
but actually it's just as ferocious as it is gracious, like the ferocity of these experiences, if we truly open to them.
mm.
Yeah, it's a wild ride, isn't it? And like you said,
Ugh,
it hurts. It just actually hurts. It's not ambiguous in any way. It
no.
actually hurts. And I guess this is why I really wanted to chat to you, is because as anyone who's been on an awakening path and explored online teachings or whatever, especially more modern online teachings of various different schools, they don't talk about this. They just don't talk about this. I've never seen, I don't think, maybe one from Angelo, and it was beautiful, but it was kind of like a non-dual inquiry. But they never talk about death. They don't talk about uh, the truth of mortality. A lot of videos and a lot of teachers talk about impermanence or the lack of permanence in conditions, which is obviously a crucial aspect to this
Right.
awakening heart. But what that points to is us. It points to this. It points to the lack of permanence in this being, in that being, in all beings. There's no permanence to be found anywhere.
No.
And yeah, so actually, if and I'm going to maybe make a it's not that grandiose, but like a sweeping gesture. But like, I would say that if we don't open to the truth of death, both the death of our loved ones and our death, and sit with it and explore it for years, and I mean for years, because you will get to the point of your death. Maybe you'll be aware of it. Maybe it'll happen suddenly.
Mhm.
But we, if we don't hold that close to us, that exploration of the truth of life, which is the truth of death, then we'll never be free. We won't be free to live a life without suffering. I don't see how that is possible. So we
Yes.
can talk about resting in non-dual awareness all we like, but if you've not thought about deeply, not just thought about, deeply explored your mortality on a cellular level,
Yes.
you
Because
won't.
the body's
Yeah.
response is totally different than
Oh
what
yeah.
we were talking about in the
Yeah,
beginning, which
yeah, yeah.
I'd be fine if my mom died. I would do this.
Mm,
I would do that. The mind has
yeah.
these things, but the body, no,
Mm,
there's no way around that. The mind can negotiate all that it wants, but your
that's it.
heart is racing,
I
right?
love
So
that. Yeah,
how
yeah,
do
yeah,
you
yeah,
be with that racing heart?
yeah. And I think this is why. So I've been, part of my practice for many, many years has been working with. I say working with. It's hard to describe, but facing the truth of mortality, my own death, and death everywhere. I mean, I'm kind of wearing, like, I don't know if you can see that necklace, which has got like skulls all over it. It's just kind of like having these constant reminders that um of the truth of this manifestation. And also, um I think one thing that's really occurred to me in the last 2 or 3 years following
my awakening path, you know, where I am now, there's, you know, there's just this experience, there's just this moment. So, which is beautiful. But what that also means, which nobody will talk about, is we're going to die now.
Yes. We're going to do everything now.
Yeah, we're going to die now. It's not
Yeah.
some abstract thing that Simon in the future is going to go through. It, I say
Right.
it will be experienced right now, right now.
Yeah.
And I try to kind of remember that on a daily basis, just bring my heart to this could be it. This, like, maybe 10 minutes time, maybe an hour's time, but at some point right now, it's going to change. And and like you said, that it's not negotiable. And this is why it's such a beautiful practice to work with, is because you cannot get around it. It's just like this, I wouldn't even say inky black. It's just like this monolithic mystery that will not be moved. And it's like you can't do anything with it up here or here. You cannot wrestle it into submission. It just stays as truth. You know,
Yes.
this,
It
yeah,
lives.
mysterious truth.
Yeah. It lives its own, I mean, it is living. It's a living thing.
I
All
love that. Yeah.
living things. I am so touched
Mm,
by what you just said. I just wanted to thank you
how
for that.
cool.
That idea that you die now is
Oh yeah.
so delicious.
Mm.
Thanks for that.
And that's the truth of it, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, if, well, I guess that's the truth of what the awakening path calls us to wake up to. You know, if we're going to live in this moment as awake, open-hearted presence, you can, I mean, you can use whatever terms you want. That's just one phrase. But also that is the truth that this is it. It's over. And it's only just begun. It's like it's all of it at the same time. But
Oof.
yeah, and it's so beautiful because actually I know in my experience, and this is what I got a flavor of from what you were going through in real time, was it's there's no more profound life experience to awaken to, or to fuel awakening, is there? Like, it's got this way of, if we open to it, really shifting, like you said, something almost instantly got ripped away from you. I mean, what
Yeah.
else does that? What else does
No,
that? It's
I
like
don't, I mean, I am never gonna have another mother to lose again, right? There's this like this
Mm,
the
yeah.
idea, the concept, and then there's the experience of it. And I do believe it's almost like this, the words that keep coming up are like ripped away or scrubbed raw, something where there's really,
Rubbed
and
raw.
also
That's
the
amazing. Yeah.
things you cared about,
Yeah.
the way
Mm,
that life looked to you, the your priorities, all of those just drop, and
mm,
you're faced, so it's like zero distance, right?
mm,
Suddenly it is love, it is love, it is care, it is all these, it's these things that felt so far away. Yes, yes, I'll hug my husband. Yes,
mm,
yes, things, but like, but the mortgage and but this, and then that happens, everything just drops away, and you're like
mm,
this visceral meat sack, just like rawly going through the world, like
mm,
without
mm,
any skin. It is, wow, wild.
mm, mm,
But I don't know, are you ever more alive than when everything's been ripped away? Truly, like, are you ever more
mm,
in your nervous system? Are you ever more sensitive?
mm, mm. So interesting, because actually, this is the truth. I say the truth. Uh, this is what awakening really, really is. This is what it's pointing to, is to fully embody uh, this living, dying presence, or present, or this living, dying experience at all times. So actually, it can be, interestingly, it can be integrated, like, and integrated into a moment by moment by moment experience. And when everything's ripped away, well, actually, if it's integrated, there's no longer a rip, or rather, where the rip once existed, that's been solved, and what I'm sensing in you, in the way that you speak now, specifically recently, is that in those places that have been tended to, do you know what, the tears that have been tended to with presence and availability, we could call it love, actually more love grows out of them. Like, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because actually, if we do tend to the deepest wounds with availability and an open heart and a listening, a genderless listening, not trying to change, but just to witness and to be with, then it you start to realize, oh, that's not separate. That is the love. That's what the love was. It's like it kind of self fuels this loving there. I don't know how to describe it. It's like just kind of like just outpouring of love for life into the world. And what's interesting is that actually that outpouring of love for life is also the love of death,
Yes.
which
It's
is
just it's
just
inseparable. I feel like we almost need different words than death.
yeah.
Like what you said at the beginning, it's not
Mm,
complex enough. It's like the word petrichor, how it
I love it.
means the
Yeah,
smell
yeah.
of the
Mm,
of the ground after it rains. We need something
yeah.
that has that feeling of like spherical. When you describe the word death, it just sounds so flat compared to petrichor, which describes a
Mm,
whole experience.
yeah. I had a chat with a friend online recently, and he was talking about passing of his auntie and how she actually, it was just a peaceful experience. She was he was alongside her, and she was opening to it, and she said, she's this beautiful expression. She said, like, it's like there's a thief in the night that keeps coming every time I go to sleep, and I wake up and there's less of me.
Mm.
And it's just like, but at no point, well, what he was describing, her way of being at these last moments of life, he was describing life. He wasn't describing death. It was like the most alive experience that I've probably ever heard. But the mind says end, death,
Right,
over. And it
right.
just kind of shows you how ill-equipped both the language and the concepts are to deal with this,
Yeah,
yeah, this natural part of being.
yeah, yeah. It wants to say, this person is gone from me.
Yeah.
I am now without. But if you really think about the dropping of a body and that sense that there's this oceanic awareness that is everything, that body dropping just goes, the ocean just becomes everything again, right? And so if that's not separate from me anyways, then essentially my mother now is closer than she could have been when she was that differentiated perception that she had, right? So there's this beautiful sense of deepening intimacy, but there's also the mind and the desire to put everything in the boxes of experience. But it really does kind of break a lot of those neat and tidy containers that we want so badly to
Mm,
make.
yeah. When I speak about this, feel into this facet of the human condition, the fact that, well, it's just life, death, like this, the same
Mhm.
thing, isn't it? It's just like death, life, whatever you want to call it. Like, but because it's so integral to the nature of this manifestation, I feel, like you were describing before, it just feels so alive. Like when it's communicated about, and kind of goes to show that actually it's just convention, like societal convention, certainly in the West as well, that says, oh no, it's a moot subject. We can't talk about it. It's too difficult for us to be with. Because actually, yes, there's the feeling of sadness when somebody passes. It's felt. It's a felt experience. There's a feeling of sorrow, as you know, and all of and this mixed feeling, but it's just as equally loving and caring and connecting. There's no, other than thought, there's no evidence that this is a bad thing. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
yeah, but
It
the
puts us
story is
go
so
ahead.
convincing because it's been told for so long. Like
Yeah.
death is the enemy of life, apparently. It's like,
Right. Right. Like there's an
yeah,
opposite to be had.
yeah, I
But it
know.
does put us face to face with the deepening mystery of it all. It does
Mm,
ask something. There's a request in it, I think. Or like a curious, I can't believe I'm using the word playful to describe the
yeah, I
process of
can.
what happens after. But there is, if
Mm,
if it's not also serious, then, and if there is just life unfurling constantly, that this moment is already gone as soon as the words have come out of my mouth, if this thing is this roiling, rollicking flow, then there is innately a sense of play in it, because there's not a serious, it's not so serious to something, right? It's not so serious to one thing. But for me, perceived separate self Allison, like the loss of the mother, right?
mm,
It's really stunning how these things can essentially coexist, my perception of self and
yeah,
the actuality of
yeah,
life.
yeah. This is the not to non-dual nature of experience, isn't it? Like, and it's so yeah, he kind of shows how, like you said, there's an invitation within all of this to awaken to the, yeah, non-definable, not separate, non-dual aspect of the experience, because it is both, isn't it? It is both the knowing that uh that I'm not this and my mother wasn't that, and nothing's gone anywhere. Well, I mean, where could it go ultimately? But also the felt experience of loss, because
Yes.
that really, it really is felt, isn't it? And like
Oh
you
yeah.
said, it's excruciatingly felt. Uh, and it's just this fascinating thing, isn't it? It's like, because in my experience too is the knowledge. The I say knowledge, not the knowledge here, the knowing of the heart, the deep knowing that I am not this. It's
Mhm.
just it's felt in every movement, in every word, in everything that I engage in.
Right.
There's just the deepest knowing. No matter, it's hard to. I don't really talk about my experience too much because it can gets a bit weird sometimes online, you know. But yeah, it's just known now. Like it's just deeply known and deeply embodied and deeply felt the nature of my true nature, you know,
Yeah.
which isn't separate and it isn't the individuated self. And yet, and yet,
Yeah.
it's not separate from the apparent manifestation of self. And
Yes.
this is where play comes in, because actually, if we try to like, I guess mourning's a great example. It's a great way to non-dually spiritually bypass it all by just resting in presence and just like, oh, I'm going to be like the abstract non-differentiated awareness, and it's just going to be like not fixed open emptiness, and you know, that kind of rhetoric. But that's fixation, isn't it? That's just a view, because actually the truth that is felt viscerally in the being in that
Yes.
moment is, oh, this does really hurt. Like it's
Yeah. Ask your
actually
body,
painful.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
ask
yeah.
your body, what's the
Mm,
actuality of what's happening? And sometimes I feel like it's possible for us to kind of intellectualize a bodily sensation and say like, well, like
mm,
this morning I was looking at something and I was in my head about it, and I was like, I'm gonna check in my body, and it
yeah,
bloomed and it was
yeah,
huge and it
yeah.
wafted away as things tend to do. But that
Mm,
whole thing of like, yes, you can be like, oh, well, there is no me to really experience the death of my not mother, right? And that's like you said, that is the actuality. That's the undeniable actuality.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yet the
yeah.
story of Simon, the story of
Mm,
Allison, the story of a daughter
mm,
without a mother now, that's
mm.
lived, right? Like that's living.
Lived.
That's part of this living. So like when
Yes.
I go into the longing for her, when I go into the extraordinary beauty of who she embodied was,
Mm,
it is so tender, and it affords such a beautiful
mm,
opportunity to be 100% the excellent mother right? Like
Mm,
to mother myself to cradle those parts in the expansiveness. And it's
oh,
such a
beautiful.
marvelous, it's like one of her biggest gifts to me. Like this is how you mother.
Yeah, that's that's really awesome. Yeah. Oh,
Hmm.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel that, and I guess it's worth pointing out as well that there's a lot of us that don't have that relationship with the mothers, or the
Right.
fathers, or with the primary caregivers, like and for me, it's complicated. Like it's way more complicated than that. Like it's, to be honest, it's love and hate in equal measures, really. Like it's, and that's a truth to be awoken to as well. Like, because I remember like when my mum passed away, I tried to rest on the image, uh, the story that I would repeat to myself of how it was, who she was, what the relationship was like, which was just, yeah, it was biased. It was, and this angelic being, that's just not the case. It wasn't the case. And then it was only until I was to truly embody the truth that she was complicated. Our relationship was complicated. It was very painful and very loving at the same time. It wasn't one thing. It was just this deep, rich, complex human experience that, uh, yeah, in all honesty, hurt and nourished in equal measures. It feels like, um, and that was nobody's fault.
No.
That's the nature of conditioning. Like she didn't do that. It's just the way it unfolded. Um, but that can be really challenging as well. So, like, if we, lose loved ones, I say lose, we can only use the parlance, can't we? But like, yeah, if our loved ones pass away, then if we don't have this nourishing, nurturing experience to rely upon, it can be very challenging to then turn towards the truth of that.
Mm.
Because for some people, there might be a part of us that's like, thank fuck they're gone.
Yeah,
Like
for
that
sure.
was that was too much. I
Yeah.
was too like I couldn't I was never able to be myself whilst they were alive.
Yes.
That's a challenge, isn't it? Like it's because in that, if you were to feel that way, you can see how shame just follows it. It's just like immediately with the outpouring of that, all of the shame will come up like, no, but you shouldn't.
Mm.
You should be like this. You shouldn't feel that way. And it's like just this really complex web of emotional and like physical experiential conditioning. You know, it points to um, this invitation to open to truth, um, no matter how difficult, how
Yeah.
complicated, how challenging it is. You know, it's not always just going to be the truth of like you talked about. You felt this loving blossom in your experience, but actually you might feel love and hatred blossom in equal measures. Like
Yeah.
that can be really hard. And I think in my experience, and I know it's definitely been the case for you, like this is what community and family are for. I say family, not necessarily the
Yes.
dysfunctional ones, like, but friends, family members, wider community, people that you can trust. We can't do this thing called life alone, really. And especially, we can't, in my experience, open to the truth of loss alone.
Mm.
You can try, but it doesn't feel the healthiest thing to do. And I know a lot of people that have tried, but it's only when, it's been shared with an open heart have I felt nurtured. Have I felt able to explore the depths of, what was going on.
Yes. And for someone to model compassion for you too, especially if a situation
Mm,
has equal parts. Like sometimes I would say to my sister that our mom was like my jailer and my confessor at the same time in various aspects of growing up, right?
yeah,
Really painful.
yeah.
There were some things, right? There's some
Mm,
things in any perfectly imperfect parent-child relationship or deeply imperfect parent-child relationship.
mm.
And that sense of when you're in community, it's like somebody can titrate that. When you're talking about shame, when someone comes and titrates compassion onto your shame,
Mhm.
and you feel what it really feels like, especially if your parent wasn't
Yeah.
capable of that level of caring for you, if you didn't have
Yes.
an excellent mother to model, somebody outside of you comes and drops that in, and then you can feel, oh, that felt really good. Maybe I can offer the same sense to these shameful parts. What happens if I can stay and pay attention and be with this unfolding of this thing inside? And I feel like that's such a gift to experientially have, is like, I can love this. You know?
I mean, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, it's just really beautiful that you say that, because like titration is a great example, isn't it? Because um, certainly what happens in the awakening process, or everybody I know that, and everybody I've spoke to that's been through an awakening, thinks that they've got it and that's it, it's done. And this is kind of like one of the drawbacks of the way that it's communicated in modern times. It isn't like that. It just is. I don't know anyone that truly it's like that. You could say that every single person I've spoke to that has had that experience falls off the wagon. Everyone, every single person. It's a long, deep, integrative process that may last a lifetime. And that doesn't mean that we can't be free from suffering. Self-referential suffering for a lot of that lifetime, but you know, like the bodhisattva vow, one of the bodhisattva vows is delusion arises ceaselessly, and I vow to see through it. That means it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. Like there's a vigilance of the awake heart to keep noticing how, and I know you will have felt it in the last month or two, like you'll have felt the opening, awakening, blossoming, loving. It's like, oh, it's all love, and then suddenly it just starts going, oh, and I get
Oh,
stuck
yeah.
again, and then it's like, yeah, and
Yes.
these things just start, the delusions just start hooking us again. You're like, oh crap, like,
Yeah, or somebody like misbehaves, or something happens where you lose your shit, right? And you're
mm,
faced with
mm,
even deeper like concentric circles of compassion. Like, well, I can
yeah,
hold the fact that this person has behaved in a way that the me doesn't like, and I
yeah,
can hold the fact that I responded with anger. It's like
mm,
it's so unconditional that everything is allowed,
yeah.
including
Oh,
dipping back.
we have
Oh,
we have a light falling to the floor. I have it back. Sorry.
no
Um,
work.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I get you, and I guess actually recognizing when we can't muster compassion, it's not available, like,
Hmm.
because um yeah, life is hard. Sometimes life is hard, and certain circumstances, I would say every circumstance calls on the awake open heart to meet it with compassion. Every circumstance, that there isn't one I can think of that doesn't benefit from a compassionate awake open heart. However, that's not always available, is it? It's just like, some things are just really, really challenging, and we can, let's say we've been doing this awakening thing for 5 years. Okay, it's 5 years, and I had an awakening 2 years ago, and I've done loads of shadow work, so I feel like I'm awake. Yeah. And then life just goes, okay, well, here's this thing, and you go, what the fuck is that? Like, I can't just. And then what often happens is this kind of weird denial, which I see in a lot of the people that I work with, is that, oh no, I just don't want to deal with it. So they'll shut it out of their experience, or um, they'll, yeah, they'll subtly blame the other person for not being awake enough. It's
Mm.
like, wow, that's
Ooh.
interesting. Yeah, it's like,
Uh,
oh no, I'm the awake one.
oh
You're not awake.
boy.
I mean, I've even seen people. I'm probably not going to get into this too much. I've
Yeah.
seen people that I know have been through a long journey, and they've said stuff like, "Oh, I don't really communicate with people or spend time talking to people that aren't interested in awakening anymore. Like, I don't want to. I don't find it nourishing. It's like that's 99% of humanity.
Right.
So like if like that is conditional, it's like it's probably one of the most conditional types of well-being you can get. It's like I'm only going to speak to a very small subject section of society that want to wake up in line with what I think awakening is. It's like, yeah, but life is calling you to meet it, you know. So um it's a fascinating thing, but this is, I guess, I'm pointing to that kind of the delusive habit that's in the world. Um, it just keeps coming, it keeps coming, it keeps coming. So, and this is all of our lives. It will happen all of our lives. And I think from what I've experienced in others, it's especially strong at death, at the point of death, or especially strong at the point of ill health, moving into the potential of death, because actually that's where the stakes are the highest. It's all on the line there, isn't it? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
what hatred are you still carrying?
Yes.
What, because there's a lot of people that have died pretty terrible deaths. And I don't mean like they've been disemboweled or anything like that. I mean, you
Yeah.
see that they're just in emotional agony
Yes.
at the time of their death, railing against the truth of what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lifelong path, this.
Yes. Yes. And I think the idea of it being done is so, it definitely betrays the mind's machinations, right? Like, oh, well, there's
Mm,
a there's an ending point, and from there I won't suffer from there. But meanwhile, life is very messy. Like
yeah.
this is it's so abundant in all of its forms. And
Mhm.
one of those forms is like that it's not, it doesn't follow a prescribed, it's rollicking, right? There's not
I love
like
that
I
term.
can't
You use that
grasp
twice now.
it.
I like it, rollicking. Yeah. I get kind of like an image of like this crazy, joyous fool smashing his head with a ladle or something, like whilst singing a song covered in shit, just just total chaos. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Would you say so? We've talked a little bit about. I think your mum passed away in February. So it's about 6 months. Is that right? It's
6
6 months,
months
isn't
as
it?
of last Thursday, yep, yep.
Okay. Obviously, where you are now through this process of, I'm going to call it a process of further deepening of awakening. Like that's clearly what you're describing. What I'm hearing and what I've read is this. And what is awakening is without a doubt the loving heart. It's the loving heart waking up to the truth of life. Um, But would you say that it's affected, you can see the effect that this process has had on you as a friend, as a mother, as a partner?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The mm, I would say that there would have been this point at which a response would have come from me about something,
Mm,
and that point has completely changed. I'm unfamiliar to myself as I've known myself to be. And then sometimes that means
mm,
that like I'm like anger comes really quickly, and it's like a dragon that I'm riding that's so different than it used to be. It was here and now it's
yeah,
here. And
yeah,
so I'm like, well, hold on a minute. I've
yeah,
got a
yeah, yeah.
dragon.
Mm,
And then in other instances, something that would have driven me crazy, I don't even blink. So it is
mm,
it's really something. And then the underlying beauty just running underneath it like a subterranean river is just like, this is it. This is it. This is it. This is it. There's no other, and there's no perfect, and there's no
mm,
wishing, there's no hoping, which sounds bleak, but it actually feels like freedom. I don't want
mm,
to wish anymore. I mean, like hoping and wishing, it takes so much energy towards otherness. And really the actuality is so rich.
mm, mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I'm fully on board. I feel
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Is that the deep conditioning of a reactive body mind, um that actually that's the gift of awakening, is we get to see how we are conditioned. And the invitation is to learn from how our habitual responses to those conditions, the reactivity, bound us to suffering pretty much all our life. So like you said, you might feel the anger thing kick off somewhere, but often before we know it, we're halfway down the track of habitual response, or it's not even a response, reactivity. We're maybe shouting, or we're smoking, or we're having a glass of wine. We're doing the thing to try and cope, but it's kind of done heedlessly, and we're perpetuating the habits that we thought in the past would help. But the beauty of the awake heart is that it gets to see that now and go, oh, that doesn't work. Ow, whilst we're doing it. So it's not
Yes.
like we get to not do it. You get to do it, but you get to feel how shit it is whilst you do it. And you're like, oh man, okay. Right. But then gradually over time, if we're able to, and you pointed to this really nicely, if we're able to kind of like increase the fidelity with which we feel in the moment, then we're able to ride the dragon. That's a great way of putting it. Like we're able to explore the felt sense of anger without reacting to anger.
Yes, it's like you don't have to hand it off
Mm,
anymore, right? Like
mm,
I mean, you can, that
mm,
still happens. But a lot
mm,
of the time it's really like, whoa, I have this
mm,
thing that I get to actually feel. And I feel like before we have the option to do that, so often, again, it's like that I'm completely full. Here's my anger because I can't hold it.
yeah,
Right. And instead, and now here we
yeah,
are like, oh, this feels amazing and weird and difficult. And
yeah.
I'm staying here.
I'm staying. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I'm just like this resolve. Resolve to just. I guess it's like it just costs too much. You talked about in something recently about abandoning yourself. It just costs too much to abandon yourself at a certain point. Like you've done it so many times, and you've felt the pain of that so often. And it's normally a perpetuation of a pattern from earlier in life where we've been abandoned by others. But it's just like, no, not anymore. I'm
Yeah.
staying with this. And what's really beautiful, what you'll find, and I know you already have found because you just described it, is that at some point, if we stay with open acceptance and availability, that reactive trigger, it's like a flame that goes out. It just dies. The flame of anger in response to that trigger, it just goes out. So then the same thing will happen at some point, normally at a mysterious point that you don't know when. And you go, oh, there's nothing there. It didn't do it. Like for whatever reason that the person said the same thing in the same situation, and I just feel availability. There's
Yes.
just like total stillness and openness and the ability to participate with the situation without reacting to it from, fear or mistrust or whatever.
Right.
And like you said, that's got the taste of freedom to it.
Yeah.
That tastes like real freedom. Is like not being the person who's in an imagined non-dual land. It's like being the human that's available to meet life with an open heart without having to abandon others and ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And to be with the unfolding of what's happening in front of you in
Mm.
a way that's like that person, let's say before you were afraid of somebody being angry because it would jog this thing inside of you, right?
Yes.
So that idea of then being able to be in front of somebody who's angry and observe and be present, and also to
Mm,
not have this sea kicked up inside of you, and just to be able to be
mm,
with like, okay, now I can just witness and continue to witness this moment. It's
mm,
really something to experience. Like it feels like somebody surgically removed something from me sometimes.
mm. Yeah, and then what we get the chance to do is explore what's here when that's not.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is, well, it's a trip, like it's a total trip because, when delusive hindrance, you could call it, like these delusive views of the mind that try to manage the situation, when they drop, when they fall away, what we are available to participate in is beyond, so far beyond anything I can imagine. It's just beyond what anything the mind can do, you know. And it's so alive, it's so richly alive, but it's so much bigger than the human realm. Like, it's just this unfathomable, indescribable, I guess you could call it an experience, but just as experience. And it, with that availability to be that, well, it's love. That availability is love. So you start realizing, oh, this experience that experiences itself is always available, which means that it's infinitely loving,
Yes.
because love is availability. Well, you could use different words, but it feels like for me, love's unconditional availability, like just the meeting of whoever, whatever, with no conditions, just total seeing.
Yeah.
And this moment always does that. It just keeps
Yes.
seeing itself as us, as itself, all of the time, infinitely. It's like, wow. And I don't know if you feel the same, but when you feel into that, sometimes like, oh, I'm not ready for that. Like, that's
Mm.
so much love. Like, that is, I mean, it's wild. Yeah, you just could feel it
It's yeah.
saturating every fiber of your being.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so it's so intense. It's like the idea of us distracting ourselves from all the things that are happening because we're bored, but really the unfolding of everything is so dynamic and rich. In the
Mm,
last meditation at that retreat that we just went on,
yeah, yeah,
I had an experience. I just intuitively thought, I'm going to lay down for this one. I never lay
yeah,
down when I meditate.
yeah.
And I went inside of this sensation of disappointment that I had had, and it dropped me
Mhm.
down experientially into my root chakra. And then there was again another energetic experience of shifting,
Yeah,
opening, and
yeah.
brightening, I guess. And it was so much love. And the first time that I'd experienced that in December, I actually stopped the experience. I was like, I have to get up and do
Mm,
housework because
mm,
this
mm,
scares me. I don't know
mm,
if I can be with this. I feel like I'm gonna
mm,
die. And then when it happened, I was practiced, right? I'd felt that before. And so letting it be all the way to some point of like, it's like there was a book in the 80s, I think, called How Much Joy Can You Stand? Just that sense of like like a rending that comes
yeah.
from love and joy. That's, I
Mhm,
mean, it really, I think it really is like you almost have to train, like you have to lift weights.
mm.
You almost have to, it's like lifting a 20-pound
Yeah.
weight when you can
Oh,
only
yeah.
do 5, right?
Yeah,
And like you
yeah,
have to
yeah,
train to let that much love course through
yeah,
whatever you perceive yourself to be.
yeah.
Boy.
Yeah, because to what you perceive yourself to be, that's extremely dangerous.
Hmm.
To the perception of the self, that's like, it's like antimatter. It's
It's
like
eradication. Yeah.
it's death.
Yes, it is. It
Yeah.
is. It's like it's the mental, it's the death at the mind, right? It's like
Mm,
again, not that round, spherical, actual death. Like what death
yeah,
really is. It's that
yeah,
textbook. I read this. This is what it is.
yeah. That's it.
Sweet, sweet mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so beautiful. Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'm just really grateful for you and what you're experiencing in the world, and I get a real sense of um, devotion, actually. Like, you are devoted to this moment, more so than ever.
Oh,
Obviously, over the last like 6 months, but
yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of, yeah. In Buddhism, they talk about going for refuge. I don't know if you've heard the term going for refuge. So going for refuge is, I mean, refuge is like when you're lost at sea, and you need a true safe, like, place to rest. You know, and actually, they say that there's very few true refuges. So what we spend our life doing when we feel this turbulence and lack of safety, we go to false refuge, we go to conditional phenomena, the conditioned world that comes and goes, like things, ideas, concept, cars. We go to those things for absolute refuge. We try to get absolute security in that which is absolutely insecure, because I've never seen anything arise that doesn't cease. That's the nature. That's the nature of things. That's the nature of phenomena. Phenomenal existence arises and ceases, arises and ceases. Apparently, that's how it's experienced.
Right.
So whilst we go to refuge to that, we are bound and destined to suffer. That is the nature of suffering, ultimately. But what you're describing is like this faith. It's faith that actually, this is where I go to refuge, right here, right now. This is the only true refuge, is this moment, this experience, this unfiltered, totally embodied experience of now. And yet, to the mind, it feels like the most dangerous place in the world. It's like- and that's the trick. That's the tricky thing about this path, is that recognizing that this truth, this aware, present, knowing truth of now, is the only true refuge. But coming back here again and again and again, that's the weightlifting. That's
Mhm.
that's the training, isn't it? It's the,
Yeah.
no matter how crazy shit gets, like, we come back, we come back, we come back, we come back. And it doesn't get crazier than when our loved ones die, or our loved ones are really, really ill, or people get deeply hurt or assaulted, or we die, we get really ill. That's when we put the training into practice. If we've trained enough, and when I talk about training, I know you're probably pointing to this, it's years. It takes a long time. You've got to keep coming back. You've got to
Yeah.
build that faculty to be with the moment. It doesn't happen and people might hear this and be on their awakening journey. It doesn't happen in a 2-year inquiry session of who am I. It just doesn't. Like,
And it's fine.
and
It's really like it's endearing that we want that,
yeah,
right? We want the
yeah, of
mind
course we
so
do.
deeply wants
Yeah,
to be like, well, if you attend this many retreats and you do
mm,
this thing and this thing,
yeah,
then this mathematical equation is going to get you this result. You can bank
yeah,
on it. These are all these the words that our mind really
mm,
craves, right? Like
mm.
trustworthy, bankable, solid, fixed. And that's like 0%
Yeah,
of what's actually happening. There's
yeah,
there
yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
and there's no path. It's just like
Mm,
it's already legitimately right here, and it's like
yeah,
already happening, right?
yeah,
It's like that's the part that's so crazy, is that
yeah.
we want
And
to
yet
say,
we have to practice
of
to
course,
be
yeah,
with this, and that's,
yeah,
yeah, and I love that, trustworthy, bankable,
yeah,
reliable.
mhm,
But that's the nature of false refuge, isn't it? I'm going to that which is unreliable for reliability, because
yeah,
everything that comes and goes is the only thing I know about it is, if it comes, it goes.
yes,
That's it. So, and yet, through looking for that reliability, we're going to the most unreliable place, the conditional world. Like, and
it's so
it's so,
sweet though, isn't it? Like so sweet.
I mean, yeah,
It's
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 also
it's very
pain in the
it's very
arsehole as well. Like, it's kind of like, it's annoying though, isn't it? Like, I mean, it is sweet. It's kind of, it's an innocent
yeah,
movement for sure. Um, but at the same time, it it's such an interesting thing, that, isn't it, sweet? Because yes, it's sweet, but it's also deeply harmful when we
mhm,
see it played out in the world as
mhm,
greed, hatred, and delusion. When we see that that delusion of the mind playing out as greed and hatred in humans, we see death, war, riots, racist attacks. Like, there's some shit going down in the UK at the moment. I don't know if you've heard. Like,
no,
it's kind of ugly stuff. I'm not going to get into it, but it's like kind of race riots happening in multiple cities in the UK. But this is what we were talking about before. Well, actually, how does the open, available heart meet that. That's the challenge. That's what this path requests of us. You could talk about like the election in the States, and Trump being a little bit of a racist weirdo and all that kind of stuff. But how does the available heart meet that? Because the 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 one who wants false refuge wants to take a side that beats the other side and says, oh no, he's this way and he's wrong. They're that way and they're right. That's a bad other. I'm on the side of good. We win,
Right.
But that is unreliable. It's by
Right.
its nature unreliable. So the movement of truth and the movement of open-heartedness is to just see, oh man, there's a lot of delusion here. And it's nobody's fault. And that's so hard to be with. Like to meet violence and hatred and recognize that. And might sound well, I know this sounds controversial to the mind. I know it does. But to the mind, it sounds like, no, that's bullshit. They're at fault. They're to blame. But the
Right.
truth is not that. The truth is
Right.
not that. It's way more complex and conditioned than we can even come close to understanding. So then
Yes.
all we can do with a view to meeting it with honesty and authenticity is open our heart to it. We try to
Yes.
open our heart the best that we can to the hatred in the world and trust that wisdom that you mentioned before, the same wisdom that knows how to live death, that wisdom will manifest through compassion. But it's a challenge, though, isn't it? It's a real challenge.
It's very challenging, but then opening to what you love, right? Like, so
Mm,
there's all these things that are so hard to look at in a world
yeah.
that feels like it's on fire so much of the time. So can
And it kind of
you
literally is in California and places like
yeah,
that, and
there are
Australia.
places that are literally on fire. So like
Yeah.
what opens your heart? What loves you? What do you love? And move towards that, right?
Mm,
Like
mm,
if seeing images of children being harmed in a distant land breaks your heart and moves you, move towards that love. Like love those children.
mm,
What does that look like for you? You get to decide, right? But the whole
mm,
idea of like no, like let what you can in, and when it finds that place, like give the love to
mm,
the place that needs love. There's never going to be, I don't know if we're going to see a world in our lifetime where like love is in full supply.
I mean, it's not new though. This feudal warring world, like
No.
it's been this way for a long time, and it's at times like this that I kind of I know deeply, deeply know that the best thing that I can do is continue to awaken a loving heart. Like it's just undeniable. It's undeniable. Like like you talked about before, it doesn't have to go past me. Like this wave of conditioned intergenerational trauma and reactivity and violence, the waves can break here, but they can
Yeah.
only break here if I'm free from the reactive self.
Yeah.
Because if those waves are hitting deep embodied reactivity, I have no choice. The reactions play out in the world. But if we're
Yes.
unbound from, or we manage to unbind from reactivity, then wave after wave can hit, but it's not hitting anything. There's no one there. We can just, well, what seems to happen mysteriously is that, yeah, there's a response of life to it, which is always the most skillful thing. Once that conditioning has been mostly worked through and seen through, the response is in my experience, is always the most skillful thing that arises, that perpetuates well-being, let's say.
Yeah. And it's patient and there's like a different time is very different in it. I mean, obviously time is not a thing. I was
Mm,
my dad the other day, we were talking about he was referring to the past and referring to the future and this
mm.
concept of time. And I said, well, Papi, when do you experience, like, when do you think about the past? Right now. When do you think
Yeah,
about the future? Right now.
that's it.
Like
Yeah.
that spacious thing that opens up, that's now.
Mm, it is. Mm.
Mm.
So thank you for exploring life, love, and death, awakening, and heart. I mean, it's all the same stuff, isn't it? Basically, like rich, juicy, rollicking, gritty humanity and vibrant, radiant, empty presence. All justice, all justice expressing how it wants to express. So, and I get a real sense of the trust you have in this now, more than ever, from the things that you've wrote and the way that we're communicating. I can just feel that faith in you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
This
that's
is
really
it.
lovely.
This is it.
This is it.
There's nothing
Like it or
else
not.
to want. Exactly.
Yeah. And I guess maybe not that you're kind of a leading expert in losing parents or anything, or wrangling with death, but having gone through the grieving process recently, is there anything that you would maybe like say to anybody who's maybe going through something similar at different stages? Anything that, it doesn't have to be advice, but just something from the heart that you think might be useful? And
Yeah.
I don't want to put pressure on you. If nothing comes up, that's okay. But
It's I would say there is no wrong way to do this.
yeah,
There's no
um,
wrong way to grieve. There's no wrong, you can distract yourself if you need to. Like
yeah,
it's so this idea that I have of like there's something that happens, right? Like somebody says something to you and it makes you feel a certain way. And there's this immediate no inside of you. Like my
mm,
mom dying was like a rock plunked into this still water of me. And the
mm,
first ripple was a hard no, right? Like, no, like to the core of my being, just screaming no. And then
mm,
several ripples out, there's that which accepts, loves, and holds all of it, including the
mm,
no,
mm.
including it. So I think just resting in the knowledge that you can't do it wrong. You can
Yeah,
be with what's unfolding in
yeah,
this cataclysmic loss. Like just
yeah,
as much as you can, again, just like stay with your experience, stay with
mm, mm,
yourself, even if
mm,
it's shame. Like where does, close your eyes, where's the shame? Can you let the shame bloom in you and stay the whole time? Can you stay until that wave
mm,
passes? Can you just, can you stay? I think is the biggest,
yeah,
like let it all
beautiful.
be acceptable, and the
Yeah,
acceptance, let it be here.
yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you. That's exactly right, isn't it? It's exactly what needed to be expressed. And I think, certainly from my experience as well, for those people that maybe the shame can't be held, it can't be felt, it can't be sat alongside with, it is too much, it's overwhelming. Accept that's the case as well. So accept that right now I can't deal with this shit. I just can't. Like when that shame arises, as an example, we'll use shame because it's so deeply rooted. Sometimes it's too much, and I need to move away. And
Yes.
and that's really, that can be really skillful thing to do. I think certainly a lot of the time when we're on the path of awakening, there can be a lot of striving and strident kind of practice. It's like I've got to be with everything. It's like you don't have to do anything. Like you don't have. There's no expectations. So if it's too much, have a break, man. Like
Yeah.
just eat some cake and watch some Netflix or
Yes.
something. Like just do some
Totally.
dumb shit. Yeah.
Yeah. When one of my best friends was dying, she used to talk about watching salacious TV. Like it was this thing that
Oh
she was like,
yeah.
it's salacious TV. She's
Yeah.
dying, doing
Yeah.
really hard work, and just like throwing on something to let it be light. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Simon,
It's
thank you.
been great to chat to you.
You too.
Yeah. Well, wishing you well. And we can, well, I'm sure we'll be in touch again. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it was fun.
Yeah.
Nice one. Oh, look after yourself, Alison.
You too, Simon. Bye.